story about where I'm from, about illegal whiskey and how stock car racing begun. Some call it Cat Daddy, some Midnight Moon, from the hills of Wills County, 190 proof.
NASCAR racing is one of the most popular sports in America. NASCAR is an acronym that means National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing. NASCAR was founded on February 21, 1948 by Bill France Sr. The very first race was in Charlotte, North Carolina. Jim Roper won that very first race. NASCAR has had its roots in bootlegging though. All the way from Virginia to Georgia, dirt poor good old boys used bootlegging as a means of attaining money to survive. Bootlegging is the act of driving illegal moonshine to customers. Law officials began catching on to this illegal hauling of liquor. They began to chase after bootleggers' cars. The bootleggers souped up their cars so they could outrun the law. A lot of these bootleggers began to race these hot rods to see who had the fastest car around. These races were unsanctioned and illegal. These people needed a safe place to race. Thus began the first race. It was held on June 19, 1949 on a 3/4 mile dirt track in Charlotte. None other than Lee Petty himself raced in the inaugural race of NASCAR. An old Petty family legend says that Mr. Petty borrowed a neighbor's car and drove it out to Charlotte. During the race, Lee Petty wrecked the borrowed car. Lee Petty was born on March 4, 1914 in Level Cross, North Carolina. In Randolph County, where Lee Petty was born, it was not uncommon to make money off bootlegging. Naturally, the Petty breadwinner needed to bring in some money for his family. Lee Petty was a bootlegger. Mr. Petty started to become pretty good at driving, and people came from all around to race him. Lee Petty knew he had a talent for racing and soon began to pursue it as a living. His wife was very happy when he left bootlegging to pursue racing. The Petty family drove all over the country racing cars. Mr. Petty won a multitude of races and acquired 3 national titles in NASCAR. His first national title he acquired in 1954. Lee Petty finished nearly 90% of all the races he ever started. Mr. Petty took his stand not only by challenging the law through bootlegging, but in the way he raced. He raced very dirty and did everything in his power to win. Lee Petty didn't care about the trophies or the fun of the sport. The only thing he cared about was the money and it as a means to provide for his family. He knew lots about cars and was very confident in his ability. In every sense of the word, Lee Petty was a professional race car driver. Many of the racers at the time were doing it only for the fun of it and not for the financial gains. It is interesting that such a stand was taken so early in the history of NASCAR. Petty was a NASCAR legend and became such a great in the sport through the stand he took to race only for money to provide for his family, which was not typical for a racer at the time. He won a lot of races. One of the most notable was the very first Daytona 500, which Lee Petty won. This was a very controversial race. It was the longest track anyone had ever raced on during the time. Lee Petty won that race by a very slim margin. It came down to a photo finish that required official review. Petty soon had a son named Richard, who also raced stock cars. Lee forced his son to race in different divisions, though, so they could make more money. This was yet another example of Lee Petty taking a stand. Lee Petty was a NASCAR giant, but every giant has to meet his David. Lee Petty had a very large crash at the time trials at Daytona Beach. His car and one other car crashed through the guardrail and ran into the nearby woods. Petty was hospitalized for months and recovered in Daytona. Throughout his recovery, he told his sons to continue the family business of racing. He returned to racing after his crash, but retired soon after, claiming racing was no longer fun. Richard Petty continued his father's legacy. Richard Petty had an amazing career of racing. He is known as the King of NASCAR. Richard's son Kyle also raced in NASCAR. Kyle, Richard Petty's son, also had a son who raced in NASCAR, but sadly died before he could make his breakout. 4 generations of Pettys raced in NASCAR because Lee Petty took a stand against the government being a bootlegger and becoming good at racing, and because he took a stand by racing for only money and not fun. Lee Petty died April 5th, 2000.
Surprise, surprise, surprise. You'll love it. Back in 1955, I met a man, his name was Clyde. You're fixing to find out what moonshine is all about. Well, by 1962, I was running 180 proof too. On tax-paid alcohol, I was running from the law.